Hey everybody, welcome to Retire with Style. I'm Alex, I'm here with Wade, and I'm here with our favorite reoccurring guest, Bob French.
Hey everyone.
Welcome back to
That
the
was
show,
Bob, by the way.
Yes, that is Bob.
So Wade, what are we going to talk about today?
We've got all kinds of things.
I was waiting,
very
it was an uncomfortable pause, so I was like, let's just kick it off.
I was wondering whether we should mention that Bob wishes he had air conditioning now up in Maine.
Yeah.
In a
So
hospital. But
old houses, no air conditioning, and it's rough. It's up in the 80s, and it's just not acceptable here in Maine. So
okay, enough small talk, guys. We got to
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And this is the part where we're supposed to say, oh my God, it's much harder than that here, blah,
That's
blah,
right.
blah.
No, I'm not going
Wade, you in
Bob.
Dallas, I was
Dallas
leaving
is
you
pretty
wide
much-
open for that.
Yeah, 108 degrees every day now. So
108? Yeah, but it's a dry heat.
Yeah.
It's a dry heat.
it's not. No, we're part of the Midwest Tornado Alley now, so it's that humid heat. But anyway, today we.
Yeah, but anyways.
Funded ratio.
This is like cart talk before like retirement planning, I think.
Yeah, the intellectual discourse everyone's tuning in for here.
Wait, what are we talking about? Go, I'll let you.
We're ready to talk about the funded ratio, which is a really helpful tool to get an assessment of whether you're on track with a financial plan for retirement. It's an alternative to Monte Carlo-based software, which if you've ever run a retirement plan and it reported a probability of success, that would be probably a Monte Carlo-based type software program. But the funded ratio just looks at it from a different perspective, where you don't have to worry about simulating randomized returns for stocks and bonds. You simply assume a low-risk type investment return, and you consider whether you have sufficient assets to meet your various goals, financial goals for retirement. So that's the main idea, and that's really what we are looking to talk about today. And we've got Bob French here as well, who helped with the retirement researcher in McLean Asset Management with creating a funded ratio tool. So he's got that experience as well. So thanks for joining us today, Bob.
Thanks for having me.
And I suppose to really get the discussion going, we should probably first talk about what we call at Retirement Researcher the RIO map, which is the Retirement Income Optimization Map, which is really just an illustration of the funded ratio without putting in any numbers. And so with the RIO map, it's about mapping assets, liabilities, goals. Well, goals are like liabilities, but let's walk through that. And there are 4 L's. I don't know if quiz Alex here if he knows what the 4 L's are.
Come
Because
on,
that's
man.
gonna be
Come on, man.
Do you remember at this point?
Yeah, Bob, text me on the side. So quick.
For Alex.
Well, the first one is love, then it's laughter, then it's prayer, and then it's
Gotta work on your
no.
spelling here, Alex.
Live, love.
Looking
What's
at
that?
the-
What's that book? What's that
Sign in the
book?
kitchen.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, live, laugh, love. I think
Yeah.
those are the 3 L's.
No, so the real map, if you think of, imagine a world, right? Think on the left-hand side, there's a column, right? And let's call that your 4 L's. And effectively, it starts with longevity. We ask I'll just name them. You can explain them, right? Longevity, lifestyle, liquidity, and legacy. Boom, Wade. They didn't even
got it,
hesitate,
right.
baby. They didn't even hesitate. Thank you
Right,
for
and
the
we've had
text, Bob.
Yeah, I was about to say, we can't see what you're looking at here on your computer as you're recording this.
No. Those are the 4 L's. Pray tell, Wade. What
You
did they
got it.
say?
Where are we going
Right,
with this?
Well, we've been talking about budgeting in the recent episodes, and the first 2 L's, the longevity and lifestyle, are the retirement budget. Longevity is really what you view as either like your core or essential or fixed type of expenses for retirement that you really, it is you don't want to outlive your ability to cover your longevity expenses no matter what happens. Lifestyle goes on top of that, more discretionary in nature, some of the getting the better retirement, travel, restaurants, nice restaurants, all that sort of thing. That's part of lifestyle. Then you've got the legacy. And we do have an echo here. We may have to... Okay, yeah, we'll have to edit a little bit. So it's not Bob. Bob just muted it.
I just muted a test and it wasn't me.
Is it... Can you mute yourself, Alex?
Yeah. Can you hear any echo off of
Hello?
me here? I'm not hearing
I
any
don't hear any
echo
echo.
now.
Might be Alex. Yeah, you're still muted too.
How about now?
Okay,
Oh.
yeah.
I'm not hearing any
Yeah,
echo
that's-
anymore, but it's been because it
I
started
don't
popping
hear
up.
an echo. I don't hear an echo at all on my end, by the way.
It's been an intermittent echo, so that's the second time it's happened since you came back
I just let
on.
it rip at this point. I think we've got good energy especially at the beginning.
Yeah, I'll just pick up for the edit here. I'll just pick up where I start describing the 4Ls again, and then you just simply can edit.
Like after you asked me and I tell you to do a little more.
Then you kicked it back to me, and then I'm explaining.
Okay,
I'll
all right,
just start
all
there
right.
again.
I
Yeah.
wouldn't sweat it. Don't even put that in your head because I don't hear it at all on my end.
No, it was pretty bad. When
It's
I was
very
talking.
noticeable. Do you have some headphones you could throw on, Alex? Or
Yeah. Hang on, let me take off my.
Yeah, when I listen at the 2.5 speed time, that echo might really distract.
just flexing your podcast speed here?
Bob, do you edit, or is it Morgan who's?
Morgan's been doing it. I think she's showing Bree how to do it. It's not like we're doing that much crazy stuff in editing, so.
Yeah, just a cut from where I started talking about what longevity and lifestyle mean, and then I'll pick up there again.
Yeah. If we want to be nice, we should give them the timestamps. So I don't know where it might be worth you going in and listening because we were like 3-ish minutes in. If you want to go in and figure out where you want to cut it, but then we can just note the timestamp when we come back.
Mm-hmm.
Very stylish.
All right,
Okay.
say something.
Are you hearing this through the headset?
Yeah, yeah. How is it?
It's fine so far. So as long as you're hearing through the headset, we should be good.
Hello, 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 hello. Echo, echo, echo.
Nothing right now,
Good.
but it was intermittent. So, but as long as you're hearing it through the headset, we should be good.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
All right.
So we're at 8:30, 8:40, call it.
We got
And
gold
so to
already.
give a sense of what these are with the longevity and lifestyle is about the retirement budget. So in recent episodes, we've been talking about the budgeting process for retirement. And to the extent that you can make a differentiation with your budgeting, longevity is more about your essential or your fixed or your core retirement expenses, with the idea being you really don't want to outlive your ability to fund longevity expenses. And then lifestyle, to the extent that it exists as something separate, it implies there's more discretion. Things that, to have the best possible retirement, you definitely want to do, but you do have some flexibility that if things are going really badly with financial markets and so forth, you could cut back a bit on lifestyle. But together, lifestyle and longevity, that's the retirement budget. And then legacy, of course, is pretty straightforward in terms of what you'd like to leave for the next generation. And liquidity gets into the idea of having additional assets available to cover potential unexpected expenses in retirement. And the way I describe those is kind of a few nuances. These could be concerns you have for retirement. They're your financial goals for retirement. but you could also define them as expenses for your financial goals are expenses that you have. So when we create the Rio map on the left, as Alex was saying, we say assets, and then it's the 4 L's stacked in boxes that the funded ratio is going to quantify: longevity, lifestyle, legacy, liquidity. Then, and these are, well, I'm sorry, that first column we would call goals. Then the middle column is going to be the assets, and then the right column is going to be liabilities. Now, the liabilities are just the expenses associated with those goals. So we could say longevity.
It's the numerical equivalence of the goals.
Right. Whatever the cost is. So the actual essential expenses is longevity. The actual discretionary expenses is lifestyle. The legacy is legacy. And then contingency expenses, contingency funds, like the unexpected things that can happen, the long-term care and everything else, that's the liquidity. And then the middle column are your assets. And those assets we like to divide, and this is going to be relevant for the funded ratio as well, between reliable income, diversified portfolio, and reserve assets. And that's the Rio map. It's how do you want to structure your assets to map them and to match them to your liabilities so that you're meeting your financial goals for retirement and have sufficient assets to meet the different financial goals for retirement. That's the Rio map. And then the funded ratio is simply putting numbers. What is the dollar value of your longevity expenses? What is the dollar value of lifestyle expenses? What's the dollar value of legacy? And what's the dollar value of the contingencies you want to be able to fund to feel like you're ready to proceed into retirement?
So wait, is it fair to say conceptually? Because someone's listening to this, and it's, there's only so much you can kind of imagine in your head, right? So if you break it down to its, building blocks, its proteins, amino acids, if you will, you have assets. You have the assets column, and you have the liabilities column, right? And the liabilities are kind of the goals, but since we're talking about numbers now, you have the assets and liabilities. And so think about the funded ratio as a big division, the assets over liabilities. And so Wade put me on the spot. Bob, which one's the denominator and which one's the numerator?
The numerator is on the top. That's going to be your assets. The denominator is on the bottom. Hey, my daughter just learned fractions, so I'm good on this one.
But that's effectively what you're doing. It's the assets over your liabilities, and it's a sense of how much you are funded. And we were just giving you the framework in how we look at it. There's a overall funded ratio, and then we break it down by components. But I just wanted to conceptually take a little bit of a step back so you can envision it without having an aneurysm at the same time.
And you can also view it as a balance sheet, we should say as well.
Yeah,
there you go.
Got an assets column and a liabilities column. Though to be clear, it's a little bit different from, well, depending on how sophisticated your balance sheets are, but we are including things like your future Social Security benefits that you don't have today, but we will consider them as assets that are part of your reliable income on the balance sheet.
Yeah.
So that's
Because there's a little bit of a theory here, as opposed to practical. What you're saying is, if you could theoretically have the present value of all your future income streams, if you could kind of take that and get some sort of pension for everything, although you can't, if you could do that, or how are you relative to the liabilities that you will have in the future? You're kind of answering that question.
Yeah.
And if it's a good one, then great. So that's why you include Social
Right.
Security, even though you technically don't have the money. You want
Well,
to know.
I mean, at the same time, you're also including
Yeah,
all
yeah.
of those future payments, all the future money going out the door as
Yeah,
well. So
fair
it's
point.
really just keeping everything,
fair
well,
point.
as we're talking about, balanced here.
Yeah, and the issue is that money today is not worth the same
Right.
as money in the future. But we're going to summarize how to put all these dollar values, either like inflows of income, like Social Security benefits, and also outflows, like here's my budgeted expenses in 2045. And we're going to try to put those together into one simple metric. And
Bob,
that's what we want to talk about.
And before you get going, I just want to maybe just set the stage for the
Yeah.
funded ratio when we get to the details. I can imagine folks are listening in, even advisors, frankly, listening in, thinking, funded ratio, what the heck is that? I've heard of Monte Carlo plan. I've heard of the basic, how to, what's $1 million in 10 years, the basic straight line budgeting kind of thing. But what's a funded ratio? Where did that come from? Does anyone else use this? I've never heard
Yeah.
this before. And in my head, Bob, I'm thinking this is kind of the de facto for corporate pensions and
Yeah,
things
absolutely.
like that.
It is. And it's something that I think is fair to say. We're seeing more and more folks using a funded ratio type of approach. And don't get me wrong, there's nothing particularly wrong. There's nothing bad about the traditional Monte Carlo approach. In fact, that's actually how we all met each other. We met building out a tool that does that Monte Carlo based financial planning. And it is a good tool in the right circumstances. What the funded ratio does is it doesn't take it one step further. It takes it one step in a different direction. Because what the funded ratio is really doing is giving you a checkup on what your financial health is at this point in time. So what you're saying is, hey, we're looking at all of this stuff out in the future. We're looking at all this stuff that we want to be able to do. We're looking at all of this money that we're planning on getting in. Does it all match up? Does it all kind of fit together? Does it make sense that I'll be able to make these future payments? We're aligning over a couple things, but we're really getting a general idea. Does this work? And that's really the question that the funded ratio is really trying to answer here. Can we actually generally do this? And then filling in the details further on down the road, but making sure that everything lines up here. So the idea is please.
And Bob, well, I mean, just even more than that, if you're using the same assumptions, the funded ratio will be equivalent to a Monte Carlo-based financial plan. It's just coming at it from a
Right.
different perspective. The Monte Carlo plan tells you a probability of success. There is a fixed rate of return that will correspond to that probability of success, but it's hidden. You'd have to reverse engineer it, which you can do, but you have no idea what kind of return you're assuming with that probability of success. The funded ratio is coming at it from a different perspective, where you pick a fixed rate of return assumption and see if you're funded. And then there'll be a one-to-one correspondence. The more funded you are, the higher probability of success. But in the same way that the Monte Carlo plan doesn't report a fixed rate of return, the funded ratio doesn't report the probability of
Right.
success, and it would have to be reverse engineered.
Absolutely.
So they are equivalent, but it's just a different way.
Yeah, exactly. It's a different way of thinking about it, and it's answering a slightly different question as well. It's answering, again, do my assets line up with my liabilities? Whereas the Monte Carlo is asking, what do I need to do to make these things fit? So it's getting to largely the same place, but in a different way, and I think in kind of a more intuitive understanding of how to kind of understand what the plan is telling us here.
Yeah, the intuition is important because I've really just completely shifted from Monte Carlo based to funded ratio, just at a personal level. And as I was writing the retirement planning guidebook, realizing more and more that a funded ratio approach is much more intuitive, easier to implement and understand than a Monte Carlo based financial plan.
For the record, and I think Bob can vouch for me, I've been a funded ratio fan way before.
He has. He
You agree
has.
with that, Bob?
He's been harassing us with papers on the funded ratio for a long time now, and he's just beaten us into submission with it. So
I just wanted to put this in the recording.
just wants this on the record here.
So what's it about? If you had to do the
Yeah.
nuts and bolts on it.
So the nuts and bolts are pretty straightforward, actually. It's, as we've described, it's literally the present value of your assets over the present value of your liabilities. Though that term, the present value, is one that, is probably familiar to some of you, definitely not familiar to all of you. But, Wade kind of summed it up. $1 today is worth more than $1 tomorrow. If I was to offer you $100 today or $100 in a year, everyone would take that $100 today. Alex, you.
Unless the
Yeah,
interest rate
I
is
got it. I'm
negative.
just trying to think of the. I'm trying to think of the readers, the listeners, right? Okay. Well, I mean, maybe we have transcripts. Who knows? But all right. So I'm listening and I'm thinking, how do I get the present value of my assets? Let's start with my investments. I'm going to
Yeah.
get granular here a little bit. My investments. Okay. And how do I get the present value of my
Your
investment?
present value is literally
How
your
do I do that?
present value of your investment accounts. It's the number on your statements.
Exactly.
Yeah, the account.
Okay,
balance.
so yeah, so in your head, if you're trying to do a funded ratio and you're looking at your investments,
Yep.
they did the math for you. Not that they did it,
Right.
it's just, that's what it's worth right now. Boom.
Yeah,
Okay.
and that really, like
So
as
take-
you're getting
take-
into this, it's just there's two different kinds of assets, two different kinds of liabilities. You've got the kind where you've got a balance today, you know the exact amount today, and then you have cash flows, things that are coming in the future or that are going out in the future. And so, as we've now stated, any sort of investment account, any sort of like
Yep.
mortgage balance or other liability, the present value of those are just simply their dollar values, what
Yeah.
The
those
statements.
balances are now.
Okay. So then Social Security. How do I do that? And maybe this requires, I don't know, a 3-minute explanation of present value, etc. But okay, how do I do the present value of Social Security? I
Sure.
don't even know where to
So,
start.
the place to start is there's, well, I guess three or four numbers that we really care about here. So, the first two numbers are pretty straightforward. It's, how much money is going to be coming in the door? How big is that check that the Social Security Administration is going to be sending you? How long are we planning on doing that? How many of those checks do we think we're going to get? So those are, well, moderately straightforward, especially that longevity question. But the two other numbers we care about. The first is something called the discount rate. Basically, how much more we value money today than we do in the future. Or put differently, how much less we value that money that we're going to get in the future. How much we value having access to that money right now. The second number is, well, inflation. So for those payments, either money going in or out, if those payments are going to be adjusted by inflation, Social Security, since that's what we're talking about, it is adjusted for inflation. So over time, presuming we have inflation, which is a pretty good assumption, those payments are going to increase. So we need to estimate what that increase is going to look like. It's probably not going to be as big as we've been seeing this past year, but we can estimate some number of that. So what?
Okay, well, but Bob, I get the inflation, and I'm trying to be a listener, and wait, clip it because I think this is very important. Chime in here. Okay, what the heck does that mean? I value money more now than in the future. How do I come up with an equation around that? Because that's my feeling.
Yeah, let me talk
Sounds
about
to me
that
like
a
you're
little
telling
bit.
me-
'cause
That is literally finance here.
there's
So-
there's an issue we're not getting into, which is just about the time preferences, but we're not even talking about that. It's more simply, if I could put my money in the bank today and then earn interest, or this discount rate is kind of like the return assumption for the plan, so that if I had the money today that I'm going to spend in the future, I could put it into this account that will earn interest over time and be worth more in the future. Conversely, so if I had $100 today, I have $100 today. If I'm going to receive $100 in 10 years, how much is that worth today? It's going to be worth less because I need less today, since I could, if whatever, $100 in the future, less today going into the bank account, earning interest to grow to be $100 in 10 years. Depending on the interest rate, that could be somewhere like $85, $90. It depends on the interest rate. But I would not need as much today to fund $100 in the future, because whatever the equivalent amount today is would be able to earn interest at the discount rate, getting me to that future date. And so that's why cash flows in the future, as long as the interest rate or the discount rate is a positive number, those cash values in the future are worth less today. And that's what the present value calculation is picking up.
That's what I wanted to get at. Just to let people know that look, there's a rate there, and then you said this, and this comes up with a lot of folks. Hey, what about my market assumptions on these investments? What if I think the market's going to go down? What if I think the market's going to go up? how are you incorporating that into the analysis? And in my head, I'm thinking about it's kind of the discount rate, and it is almost a return assumption in and of itself. But go on.
And that's back to
How would
that
you
point,
answer that
right?
question?
The Monte Carlo, you get a probability of success. If I want a 90% chance for success, again, you can, there's a randomized return that gets you to that, you can calculate what a fixed rate of return equivalent assumption would be. And that's the point about the funded ratio is, yeah, there's going to be volatility in the future, but if we think in general terms, let's just look at a simple, like, we like to use TIPS yields to allow for inflation-adjusted liabilities. Let's just assume all you earn is the TIPS interest rate plus inflation, so you get plus inflation, and see if your plan works in that context. And so it kind of gives you that basis of, can I have a successful retirement without taking market risk? That doesn't mean to say that we're telling you to invest all in TIPS or that we're otherwise telling you not to take any sort of market risk. But just as step one, how does your plan look without taking market risk? Because at some level, if you assume a higher rate of return, there's risk involved in that. And you can't necessarily assume, it depends how probability based you are and everything else, but you can't necessarily assume risky assets will earn more than less risky assets on a risk adjusted basis. So does your plan work without taking risk? And that's where, I mean, the funded ratio, you could assume a stock-like return, but we don't generally want to do anything like that because that, back to the point, that would correspond to a much lower probability of success. If we assume the TIPS interest rate as the discount rate, that should correspond to a high probability of success. Now, again, we'd have to reverse engineer what exactly that probability of success is, but we can say it would be high. And that's then, does the plan work with a conservative return assumption, such as just earning TIPS yields?
So, and that's the discount. So, Wade, let me say it this way then. So, we talk about Monte Carlo, and we've said this in a future episode, in previous episodes as well. But yeah, right. This goes back. I think this is important. So, if you think of Monte Carlo, what it's doing, it's running, it's creating these runs. Let's say it does 1,000 runs, right? And you either pass or fail. It's a binary outcome, pass or fail, regardless if it's $1, $10, $1,000, $100,000. You pass or fail based on the surplus or shortfall of your goals and plans and ability to fund it, right? Then it takes the average of those, or it just counts up how many passed, how many failed, and there you go, you get your percent. So if 900 plans passed, 100 failed, that's a 90% success rate, 90 divided by 1,000, right? I mean, 900 into 1,000. So that's a percent of success. The funded ratio is not, it's not coming at it from that direction. It's really just saying, if you could theoretically retire today and cash in on all your assets to fund all your future liabilities, did you win the game? And win the game being, do you have more than you need? You know, let's just call it like that. This is not an existential sort of question. It's just dollars and cents at this point. Did you win the game, theoretically? And so if the assets, if you divide the assets over liability and you're over one, you know, you have $110, your liabilities are $100. Hey, guess what? You know, you're funded 110, you know, you're in good shape, 1.1, right? That's telling you if you could call it a day today and walk away, you go out on top. You're Michael Jordan, you know, making that basket against Utah and you're out. You know, that kind of thing. And so if you're under, let's say by the other token, you're 90. You know, your assets are 90 cents and your future liabilities are at $1. You're under, right? But as opposed to a pass-fail, it's giving you a progression towards how far you are to get there. And I think that's hugely important. Because sure, you're in the quote-unquote fail category if you wanted to find an analog to Monte Carlo, but you're not that far away. You know? And so it gives you a good sense of how to get there. And to Wade's point about the market, hey, the market could go up and boom, that could bring you up. But by the other side of that coin is, market could go down. So we kind of remove the market stuff from here because we just want to get at the question of, if you walk away from the game today, how are you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, that's conceptually what this does.
And if you're overfunded, like your example of $110 of assets, $100 of liabilities, that's telling you you don't have to take risk. Your plan can work without taking risk. Now, you may want to take risk, but this gives you more context to think about that. When you take risk, there's always the chance that you could switch from overfunded to underfunded. If the markets drop 20%, you might now you were overfunded, now you're underfunded. So it gives you context around how much risk you want to take. And conversely, if you were underfunded, if you're like a 90% funded ratio, your assets are 90% of your liabilities. Well, if you have more of a probability-based mindset, that's where you might say, yeah, I think I can earn more than a TIPS yield. So generally, and we haven't really talked about the full concept of present value yet, but when you have a higher discount rate, it will usually cause your assets to drop faster than, I'm sorry, I said that back. Your liabilities to drop faster than your assets. So a higher discount rate will usually increase your funded ratio. And that would be this idea. Well, no, I can invest and earn more than TIPS. So therefore,
Yeah, I really think of
not
it
really
when
worried
you're
about
underfunded, it's telling you, here's how much work you have left to do. Here's how much you have to make up, basically. And, because we are assuming such effectively a conservative investment approach, and especially that one thing to call out is most people who are still in that accumulation phase, you're still working and you're saving money, you will be underfunded. That's literally the whole point of that accumulation phase, that you are underfunded and you're working towards funding those retirement goals. You're still going to be putting money in. You're still going to be likely, hopefully, having that higher expected return that's going to help you make up some of that funding gap, if you will. So it's part of the process.
And the funded ratio does work
Yes.
pre-retirement as well. You'll probably be underfunded if you assume no future salary, but part of planning out, am I on trajectory to meet my retirement goals, is, okay, if I work 10 more years, the present value of my future earnings becomes an asset. And maybe, no, I don't have it yet, but
Right.
assuming I do work the 10 more years, like I incorporate into the plan, for example,
Yeah.
am I funded? And then how much more work do I need
Yeah.
to be funded? Because each year of work is adding the present value of that future earnings as an asset, helping my
Absolutely.
assets to
Yeah.
grow.
The only thing is, if you're counting
yeah.
on market growth, that's not going to show up in the funded ratio. But it's important to remember that is risk.
No.
You're counting on that risk paying off, which, the market's been nice over the past, almost century. But it isn't always nice. That is risk that you're taking on there.
Right. If you're assuming the low discount rate, like the TIPS yield, hopefully your funded ratio is just growing over time because your assets, the investment account, those account balances are growing faster than the discount rate because stocks hopefully over time offer that risk premium and grow faster than bonds. And so as that happens, that'll help to bring you closer to being fully funded. For
Absolutely. But let's get back to that. Oop, go ahead, Alex. I'm sorry. I was going to say, let's get back to that funded ratio. I'm sorry, that present value conversation. Because that is the fundamental idea of just what it is that's going on here. And we kind of talked about that discount rate. The one we haven't touched on as much is that inflation rate. Through time, historically, we've had inflation. We certainly got a bunch now. And, we've talked, over at Retirement Researcher, we've talked a bunch about what inflation might look like going forward. And the market seems to be predicting lower levels of inflation, but that's a whole separate conversation. But we want to bring those assumptions into this. Like I said, we started this conversation talking about Social Security. That is an inflation-adjusted, cash flow. Those benefits are inflation-adjusted. So over time, the size of those checks that you get, the dollar number on there that you get, is going to be going up. And we want to bring that into the analysis. So you've got the discount rate basically pushing the value of those cash flows down, but you've also got the inflation rate pushing them back up, at least to a certain extent. And where that balance point is going to lie is going to depend on the numbers that you use, the assumptions that you use for your discount rate and your inflation rate. And we want to bring both of those into that conversation here. But the core idea of that present value is we want to bring, well, all of the values back to the present, back to a single point in time, so that we can reasonably compare, the Social Security check you're going to get when you're 87 versus, how much you're going to be spending on groceries when you're 75, and being able to kind of shift all of those cash flows back to today.
A side note, and Wade, you may want to maybe put a blurb about this. I think that one of the biggest shocks that I think consumers have when they do this, especially with regards to Social Security, is that I think a lot of our listeners, or at least the folks that interact with us on Retirement Researcher and even McLean, like Social Security is like a oh by the way kind of asset, right? It is what it is with regards to their station. But I think even those folks are shocked when they see the present value of the Social Security payments, and all of a sudden,
pay a little more attention to those.
Make the right decision around here, right? Not that I want to make this a Social Security. I don't want to make this a Social Security podcast because that's its own arc. But I think that's kind of hits people in the face, right? In terms of, oh my goodness, this is actually quite a hefty number.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's because when you do the funded ratio, you have to decide how long are you going to live? And you may use a conservative age like age 95. And so when you add up the present value of Social Security benefits through age 95, for a high earner couple, there's certainly the potential to have more than $1 million as the number of the present value for your lifetime Social Security benefits. And if it's not over $1 million, for most listeners, it's probably going to be close, maybe $800,000, $900,000. It's not an insignificant asset unless you laugh at $1 million as being insignificant. I don't think most people would. It's for many, many Americans, it is a huge part of the retirement. And so as Alex says, that's where you may think it's not all that big deal about how to do the Social Security claiming. But this is a whole different conversation and podcast. The difference between a bad Social Security claiming strategy and a good Social Security claiming strategy can be a couple $100,000 over the lifetime. So it's worth spending an hour to earn $300,000 potentially, unless you just think that's piddly.
Yeah, if your hourly rate's around $300,000, that's something.
Well, I would say this way: whoever feels that's
or if they are, we would love to have the conversation.
Yeah.
But that's an example of the present value. So Social Security, it could be $40,000, $50,000 plus inflation from your 60s through your 90s. It's going to be a big number.
I mean, that's what the present value calculation at least made me realize when I looked at it. I was like, man, this flew under the radar, but oh my goodness, does take a bite. In terms of liabilities, any because Bob, you kind of have.
Yep.
When we do our challenge, we kind of run through hundreds of these. Any reoccurring questions that come up about liabilities? Just because we spoke about assets quite a bit, and we'll have a follow-up episode to this.
Yeah. So there's a couple things that pop up. One of the things is always going to be kind of thinking through legacy expenses. One, it's really a question of, do you want to include those in your plan? Is that something that's valuable to you? And if so, how do you include that? That's generally going to be something there. The other one that really comes up is the specificity that people want to be using here. I think our listeners, I think I'm safe in saying this, they like specificity. They like being precise. But this is a tool that, is really geared more towards the big picture. We don't care, or the tool does not care, exactly what your grocery bill is when you're 93 years old. It doesn't matter, getting that number down to the cent. What we want to be looking at is the big picture here. making sure that everything kind of fits together. So that's really on the liability side, the big type of question. Really kind of getting at that specificity. And Wade, I think you wanted to say something there.
Yeah, on the liability side
Yes.
too, the taxes, and we do incorporate tax calculations in our funded ratio tool, but we don't manage the Roth conversions and all that. It's a basic, efficient retirement distribution strategy, but not necessarily the optimal one. It's spend taxable, tax deferred, tax free. But then, we, in the retirement researcher community, we have some people who are significantly overfunded. And that can create a bit of an anomaly that at first we were worried there was an error in the calculations, but it turns out it's right. It's just if you're significantly overfunded, you're going to see a big tax bill in your liabilities. And that it's kind of confusing because all your assets are just the present value. We're not showing you the fact that when you're 95, your $3 million of assets now, after covering all your liabilities, might be worth $20 million. You don't get to see that growth of the assets, but you do incorporate the growth of all the taxes you're paying, and that's where it was kind of confusing at first. But if you're significantly overfunded, you might be shocked at how much tax.
And speaking specifically about the retirement researcher funded ratio tool, that it actually does include it's not going to be doing your tax preparation for you, but it definitely does include a reasonably sophisticated model of what you're going to be paying in taxes throughout the year, to the point where that was building out that tax model was effectively building the funded ratio. That's where we spent 95+% of our effort there.
That's the hard part.
To get something that is reasonable.
Everything else can easily go in a spreadsheet.
The taxes is
Taxes are the one.
our developer was beating his head on taxes for a while. So we definitely include kind of that tax analysis in there because for a lot of people, it will depend on the exact specifics here, but for a lot of people, your taxes are going to be one of your biggest expenses. And that's kind of the hidden expense a little bit there that we definitely need to include in the analysis.
Okay. So, Wade and Bob, what I'd like to do, if you don't mind, is maybe take the rest of this conversation to the next episode, since we're kind of at the 40-minute mark, where we discuss interpretations and where we discuss how, we talked about the Rio map at the beginning. We've been talking in a general sense of a funded ratio, right? Like overall assets and overall liabilities. Mm-hmm. But in addition to that, we'd like to drill down and look at it with regards to reliable income, according to, with your essential expenses, your investment portfolio with discretionary expenses, your reserves with reserves. We'd like to kind of break up the funded ratio as well, because you could be overfunded, but we want to see if you're overfunded in all the right places, that kind of thing. I'd like to. Yeah, I think it'd be cool if we talk about that.
That'd be great.
In a little greater detail in the next episode. What
Sounds
do you guys
great,
think?
Alex. We got to twist Bob's arm to have him join another episode.
All right, thank you, everyone.
Oh,
Yeah. All right, everyone. Thank you for joining us in this round, and we'll
next
catch
week
you in the next
we'll
one.
Continue with this discussion and finish our arc on the funded ratio. Thanks. Bye, everyone.